Despite the privatization of 11 electricity distribution companies and 6 generation companies, with the federal government retaining 100% ownership of the transmission company of Nigeria, epileptic power supply has been the order of the day for Nigerians. Although installed generation capacity, mostly from thermal and hydro sources, has improved over the years, less than 50% of the generated power is being distributed to Nigerians, as the country's poor transmission network and incessant collapse of national grid, among other factors, has been blamed on poor energy production and distribution. In most recent months, Nigeria have witnessed significant power supply fluctuations and blackouts, dipping as low as 2,805 megawatts in last month, due to constant grid collapse as a result of insufficient gas. With the amount of natural gas burned off by oil companies in Nigeria annually, experts say if well unearthed, the gases will be flared could bring about a lasting solution to electricity challenges facing the country. Well, to give more insight into this and provide solutions, of course, to these challenges, Nigeria's power sector, we've been on this for a while. I have joining me via Skype from Abuja is an energy analyst, Mr. Charles Majomi. Mr. Majomi, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Good afternoon. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Yes, I was talking about the sector just earlier in my introduction to this discussion. At the time, the minister apologized to Nigerians, talking about issues with power plants and all of it. Let's do an overview. What do you make of the position of the supply to the grid at the moment? Let's do an assessment of what we have with all of the infrastructure issues and before we even go into liquidity issues that has to do with the distribution side. What do you make of all of this and the challenges we face as a country?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's really a crying shame that the 9th largest producer of gas in the world, or the 9th largest holder of gas reserves in the world, should be speaking of undersupply of gas to fuel, to power electricity for its citizenry. This is really an outcome of many different things, not least of which is insufficient supply of gas to the GenCos, and also, as you alluded to earlier, an unstable transmission network that cannot wield the quantity of electricity that the GenCos are that is required. So basically, you have problems on the transmission side, you have problems on the generation side, you have problems on the gas production side that feeds the whole thing. You have liquidity problems along the gas value chain. So it's really a big shame that we're still speaking of undersupply of electricity in an age when we've recognized two things: that gas flaring must end, and where we are recognized as the 9th largest holder of gas reserves in the world. As far as gas flaring goes, you also alluded to that, and I would say that the amount of gas we flare annually, if we were able to monetize that and provide it as fuel to our power stations, would be able to substantially transform our situation right now, where we are currently undersupplying electricity to the people.
Now, I want to ask that, did we not foresee all of these challenges before we took that bold step to privatize this sector? Or was it just like we just overlooked all of this and went ahead to privatize the sector?
I think it was a mixture of both. I don't think it was properly planned, and I think that the entrants into the sector were not properly, in many instances, were not properly qualified to undertake this really rather sacred task of supplying electricity to the people. You know, we keep talking about industrialization, gas-based, etc. The electricity market is the largest off-taker of gas in the country currently, next to other activities such as petrochemicals and other industrial activities that uses gas as a feedstock rather than a fuel. So if we're not able to correct our gas offtake market, and we didn't do it correctly initially, we are going to have this terrible problem occurring and recurring. But again, it's not brain surgery. It's not nuclear physics. It's simple, and really it just takes a careful coordination between different agencies of government to make this happen, and it will take a concerted effort to actually fix the transmission infrastructure in this country such that this kind of system collapses don't occur as well. It can be overcome. It just needs the right leadership and the right determination to do so. And if we don't do that, we are going to have these problems. But beyond that, we're going to face the problem of low industrialization, and that's going to impact negatively on our ability to generate jobs for our youth, and that's going to create insecurity in the future. So any way you look at it, it is a situation that must be fixed.
Now, lately, the World Bank came up with a report that Nigerian's power sector, that about 78% of Nigerian electricity consumers have access to like 12 hours of supply daily. Yes, the federal government was quick to say on what basis did the World Bank come up with these figures. But in reality, we know that the grid cannot satisfy, cannot even meet up half of what we need if we are to be very realistic. What do you make of this report and the true situation on ground?
I think we all have our own personal experience about how successful the grid has been in delivering electricity to our homes and businesses. So my personal experience living in Abuja is that it's improved recently, but my generator is still working overtime and costing a lot of money to do so. So I would say that while it doesn't sound good for the government, etc., to hear a report like that, I would be more inclined to believe that it's closer to that than perhaps the reality of longer hours of power and electricity supply. But again, I think the Nigerian people and their own personal experiences with power now and in recent months will speak volumes to that.
For the distribution companies, many times they argue, we've also talked about this before, Mr. Majomi, they talk about the cost-reflective tariff, and they always come up with liquidity challenges. That's been the argument. Now, where do we strike a balance?
Well, I think the cost-reflective tariff, I mean, we've all seen our electricity bills going up considerably in the last few months. And I think the cost-reflective tariff thing is realistic for the fact that it has to make sense for producers along the value chain, starting with the upstream producer. Nobody is in business to provide an incentivized pricing that would take money out of their own pockets. And so that, I think, was necessary. I think a cost-reflective tariff is a necessary reform that had to happen. My question is, going forward, what are the other areas that we need to look at? We need to look at incentivizing greater production upstream of gas. So far, most of our gas is associated gas production that's tied to crude oil. What if crude oil market takes a very, very severe dip? Our gas production will also take a very, very severe dip, and then we'll have issues of undersupply of gas. We have to look at incentivizing non-associated gas fields, and that is an element of the petroleum industry bill that must be addressed so that investors can come in and extract value while supplying the necessary dry gas that will be is required to fuel our power stations. So beyond the cost-reflective thing, we should also look at the infrastructure. You rightly pointed out that our infrastructure is not sufficient to wield the amount of electricity that we produce. there has to be a synchronization between what we're producing in terms of gas and in terms of electricity from the gas that we produce at our GenCos with what we can wheel to the customers. So we still have a lot of work to go to make it work. The cost-reflective tariff, in my view, was a very, very positive step forward.
Gas constraint, you've talked about it, but in the report too, even by the minister earlier, has been a major challenge. At this time where government is looking at domesticating gas, gas usage, even for cars, for LPG, and all of that, and with the reserves that we have, proven and unproven reserves, where do you think we stand with the issue of gas to power?
I think we have earlier, we hold the ninth largest reserve of gas in the world, about 200 trillion cubic feet of gas under our feet. We are more of a gas nation than we are an oil nation. We have everything that we require to be able to not only provide sufficient power for ourselves, but provide gas as feedstock for industrial development in this country. The problem we have is that we have a problem monetizing our associated gas, which is currently being flared at the wellhead, because our gas commercialization programs for flared gas simply have not worked. We also need to incentivize gas production from non-associated gas, and that means making it attractive for investors to come into this country and give it away and do that work, because we certainly don't have the liquidity we have now. We also have to incentivize or disincentivize the continued flaring of gas. The gas flare regulation of 2018 sought to do that by increasing the penalty for flaring gas considerably, from several cents to about $2 per thousand standard cubic feet of gas. But even in that regard, we found that a lot of producers would rather, let's say, either pay the fine and not monetize the gas, or potentially underpay the fines and continue with gas flaring. Either way, you cannot domesticate gas and have a viable gas-based industry in Nigeria that would give jobs and create the kind of security, energy security and employment security that we're looking for, unless government takes these things extremely seriously. Till date, there's been not one revocation of a license of a major oil producer who have failed to end flaring, or who are continuing the gas flaring or opposing the laws of government. Instead, government is giving what they call waivers to a lot of these oil producers who are flaring gas, and they continue the practice. And we are continuing to contribute substantially to global warming while doing ourselves a massive disservice. At the end of the day, as I've said before when I've come to your lovely program, it's all about government will, government determination to do so. And to not do so and to continue the practice as we're doing now is a tremendous disservice to ourselves and to our planet, and is not sustainable. All our power stations are thermal, they're gas-fired. The argument of renewables taking over that space is highly unlikely, given the amounts of investments that have been made into gas. Rather, gas should be seen as a cleaner transition fuel that must be given the full support of government to develop.
Yes, even the GMD of NNPC says investors need clear fiscal terms to enable them invest more in gas development. I think that should be in the PIB as we move on. But lately, the House of Reps have come up to probe revenue loss in unpaid penalties to federal government. Can you take us through what's been happening before now and what this means, particularly at this time where government needs to generate revenue?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, one of the elements that that government has in their wisdom undertaken to dissuade producers from continuing with gas flaring is to increase the fine for the penalty fine for producers of gas flares who refuse to do so, rather than monetize that flare. Now, unfortunately, government does not have its own independent means till now of metering or measuring the volume of gas that defaulting companies are flaring. Rather, we continue to rely on the data provided by the international and domestic oil and gas companies to tell tell the government how much they flare. So you can imagine, it's like going to, it's like owning a house and telling your your tenants how much they think they should pay you for rent. Now, obviously, any sane person who happens to be a tenant will try and represent that they should pay as low a rent as possible. So it is possible that that's what's going on right now. In fact, what the House of Representatives saw was that independent gas flare tracking devices, these are satellite-based technologies that track gas flares from space and determine the volumes of gas flared from basically measuring the thermal emissions from those flare sites, have found that since the gas flare regulations came into force in 2018, that upped the penalty price for gas flare from several cents to $2 per thousand standard cubic feet for gas flared in oil fields that are producing 10,000 barrels or more per day. Since that regulation came into force, there has been a growing discrepancy between the amounts of gas flared that NNPC and DPR are claiming the oil companies are putting forward and those which are being registered by these space satellites. This suggests, and it's suggested to the House of Representatives, that given the increase of the fine, oil producers or gas flarers may be underreporting the volume of gas that they're actually flaring in order to avoid paying flare penalties. Now, what's disturbing from the reports that came from the House of Representatives is that this could be as much as an underreporting of about $600 million per annum. Now, if this is the case, then we have a very serious threat not only to our domestic gas-based industrial agenda, but at a time when government can least expect or can least stand to lose this income, substantial income is being lost to the federal coffers. And I think the House of Representatives is extremely wise to investigate this potential underpayment by oil companies.
Is there a better way that we could track what does oil companies flare? You're a professional in this field. There should be a better way. Then how soon do you think we'll end flaring? We've had dates before now. We get extensions, or people, IOCs just don't meet up with it. So where do you think, or how soon do you think we could reduce, if not eliminate, gas flaring?
The first thing we need to do is government needs to establish its own independent way of metering how much gas is actually being flared. Good. We can't keep going to oil and gas companies and asking them how much they should flare, and by definition, how much they should be paying in penalties. That's number one. Number two, government should make some level of investment into gathering systems so that investors can come and use that gas and not have to be burdened with many of the problems associated with going into the swamps in the Niger Delta and other such places and gathering commercial volumes of gas for them to use. Thirdly, the PIB and its 4 elements must be passed as quickly as possible and must give recognition to gas as an independent resource, not a resource that is somehow subsumed under petroleum or oil. In that regard, I think the industry is united in calling for a gas ministry not a petroleum minister alone, but a gas minister who will oversee the development of local gas-based industries and manage the industry and develop it in the interest of the Nigerian people. I think that, like you rightly alluded to also, one essential element of the PIB is the fiscal element, or the PIFB, the Petroleum Industry Fiscal Bill, which is a component of the PIB. We need to understand where Nigeria sits in relation to the incentives for gas production that are being given to other nation states in our region, because we are no longer the only destination for oil and gas investments in Africa. Gas is being discovered along the East African seaboard, in Angola, Mozambique, everywhere. We must be fiscally competitive to attract the ever shrinking amounts of money that are still available to non-renewable energy investments. And we must do it as quickly as possible so that we don't get left behind. Because to be left behind is an extremely dangerous proposition for us right now in this country, given the amount of youths that are unemployed, the underdevelopment that is coming from lack of electricity, and the burgeoning security problems that are blowing up everywhere in this country.
Mr. Charles Majomi, I must thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure talking to you on this very important topic of discuss.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.